Boss gimmicks can be tons of fun. Done right, they're a breath of fresh air that gives players something to talk about. But designing one can be fun in the way that skiing off course is fun. Maybe you discover something new, something truly original, an unspoiled vista of game design to call all your own. Or you break your legs running into a tree. Gimmicky bosses are a high-risk, high-reward way to create a new combat encounter, and there have been plenty of horror stories coming from those who have tried. So today, I want to try to spot some of the warning signs. Maybe you can avoid some of them yourself. Let's bring some guardrails with us and take a look at some really terrible boss gimmicks. Learn to read, write, and speak fluently in tons of languages with today's sponsor, Mondly. Pearson has been teaching new languages for decades, and they've helped 110 million people learn with Mondly for years now. It's filled with bite-sized lessons for 41 different languages, each focused on more of the practical vocabulary and grammar that you can use day to day. Dip in for 10 minutes and learn a lot of useful stuff. The app adapts to your skills, with daily, weekly, and monthly goals to help you get up to speed quick and retain the language for the long term. Mondly's lessons and audio materials are recorded with native speakers, which helps learners form accents correctly. It has speech recognition tech built in, and can give you pronunciation tips, one of the tougher things for any language app to teach. If you've never found out how fun it is to get more fluent at a language, you should definitely try this out. Mondly's available for mobile and on PC in your browser, and since it's back to school season, it's on a huge sale right now. Go to mondly.app/designdoc to get 96% off lifetime access to 41 languages and start learning today. Thanks, Mondly. So what are we calling a gimmick boss? It's pretty basic, really. It's any boss that severely shakes up the game's normal rhythm. I know that sounds vague, but there's tons of room to play with. Boss gimmicks are a reaction to an instinct to shake things up, to make sure you aren't designing the same type of boss encounters over and over again. A gimmick boss is just a boss that makes a conscious effort to swerve, and what a swerve means can be completely different game to game. But when a boss gimmick falls flat, very often it falls into one of a handful of categories. The first common gimmick boss problem is phoning it in. If you're making a gimmick boss, you've got to be bold. You've got to commit. Boss gimmicks that hint at a promising mechanic and then pull their punches set players up for disappointment. Super Mario Sunshine is a platformer at heart, but just calling it a platformer undersells its main gimmick, Flood, your friendly neighborhood water jetpack. Sunshine's bosses are unorthodox, and show off a bunch of experiments in how Flood can expand your movement options, and how those can change what a platformer boss can be. For every by-the-numbers boss like PD Piranha or Gooper Blooper, there's a fight that does things unlike any other in the series. The giant mecha Bowser that you fire bottle rockets at while riding a roller coaster, going underwater to clean up an eel's teeth from above, fiery chain chomps that you need to spray to cool off. Even the bosses that are still kind of platformy, like Bowser in the Tub, are exaggerated from what you'd expect a normal platformer boss to be, thanks to the new movement options that Flood allows for. But one fight is somehow both the weirdest and least interesting major boss in the game, King Boo in the Casino Delfino. On top of a giant roulette wheel, King Boo pops up in the center with a slot machine. The different rings of the roulette wheel rotate in different directions, and won't stop until you ground pound a special tile. This does not matter. King Boo is the keeper of the slot machine. Not much happens until you spray him a little to start the reels. Depending on your RNG, a few things can happen. You can get coins to heal, a random assortment of 6 enemies, hazardous bubbles that also drop water to refill your pack, or best of all, you can have fruits and hot peppers spawn. That one's the only way to deal damage for some reason. He'll shrug off the fruit, so toss a pepper onto his tongue, and then hit him with fruit. Repeat that 3 times and it's over. The weird setup is memorable, but there's shockingly little going on here. You don't have a platforming challenge, a puzzle, or any verticality that Flood could help with. King Boo doesn't have any real attacks of his own to worry about. The spinning floor is no big deal. You just spin the slots, clear out any enemies, and wait around for the fruit to spawn. There's a lot of waiting. It's not strictly RNG hell. The game does improve your odds of getting the cycle you want if you start getting unlucky, but that just puts a ceiling on the waiting. You'll still have to wait. You aren't using the water stream to stop the reels. You're barely using flood to fight or move. You aren't even doing something like shorting out the machine with water to get something to happen. In the end, the fight just isn't about much of anything. King Boo winds up feeling like a time waster. There's never a great time for a bland boss gimmick, but there is a worse time. Whatever you do, don't phone in a gimmick final boss. Crash Bandicoot 2 is a classic PS1 era platformer. It's full of a bunch of solid, if not spectacular boss fights that ask the player to be precise with their movement in order to win. Every now and then, the game mixes things up by changing the rules of movement with a special vehicle segment. A motorized wakeboard, riding a polar bear, running to the camera in a chase sequence. These add variety to how you play, and are still close enough to the game's standard platforming challenges to feel like they belong. The zero-gravity jetpack levels, though, are not the same. Only a couple of stages toward the end of the game use the jetpack, where Crash navigates through lasers and mines and stuff. The controls for the jetpack are very floaty, which makes it difficult to be precise and easy to crash into hazards. The usual fix players took is to take it much slower, inching through each stage, especially if you're trying to do a completionist run and grab everything. The jetpack is not a great movement option, but not everything has to be great. Unless it's the final boss. Crash 2 also made the entire final fight a jetpack sequence. You're chasing Dr. Neocortex through a bunch of hazards in space. If he makes it to the exit, he wins. It plays a lot like the other jetpack stages, but with Cortex floating ahead of you. The fight itself is pathetically easy. Just attack him 3 times, and the player will probably have this thing in the bag in a minute or two, even younger audiences. Cortex doesn't fight back either. He's also just floating around the mines with caution. Catching up to him is a non-issue. The hazards just slow you down, they don't kill you. There's not much going on visually either. It'd be underwhelming as a mini-boss, much less as the game's final boss. This fight feels like it's phoning it in just as much as the King Boo fight, but the negative impact is higher thanks to when it shows up. The gimmick doesn't cover for this fight failing to deliver at the typical goals of a final boss. Without spectacle, without challenge, and without a fresh mechanic that's fun on its own terms, the Cortex fight is a poor end cap to the game. If you're having a hard time coming up with a gimmick concept, one of the more straightforward options is to convert a boss fight into a puzzle. Instead of simply attacking a boss until it keels over, the fight can be about solving something first. Though creating a satisfying puzzle is tricky in its own right. Your job in Trauma Center is to go toe-to-toe with a bunch of genetically engineered superviruses called Guilt. Each time a new Guilt variant shows up, it's essentially a boss stage. One of them is this happy triangle cuttlebug called Treaty, and it's the most puzzly of the set. You have to remove the triangles by taking out the thorns in the intersections. Simple enough. I am a design doctor after all. Alright, let's take this out and... Alright, it spreads. Yeah, okay. Wow, it really spreads, huh? Let me just do this here and... game over. Great. Guilt claims another victim. Me. Once you start pulling out the thorns and triangles, you'll find that Treaty will start to spread quick. You need to carefully remove the thorns straight upwards, then the triangle membrane once it's free, or else the thorns will come back and the triangles will spread. You can't just pick out all the thorns first, then the triangles. You won't have time. They regenerate too fast. How exactly do the triangles spread? Great question. The biggest problem this boss has is the unclear rules for what causes more triangles to appear. Other than the thorns being present, the exact cause and effect is unclear. It's very easy to create a situation where there are more triangles added than you have time to remove. If you don't hit the ground running and take out a big chunk of treaty early, it's very easy to cross a tipping point and fall hopelessly behind. The correct way to fight this thing is so obtuse that new players often feel like they've lucked their way into winning, if they can win at all. The game's own explanation is no help. For this video, I listened to a couple people explain what the rules are, and I still don't 100% understand it. The unclear puzzle mechanics make it way more likely that you get past treaty with a cheesy solution. Use Healing Touch, your magic doctor magic. Slowing down time lets you win in seconds. Is cheesing it the way it was supposed to be solved. I doubt it, but at least it keeps this from being a game-ending boss. Puzzle gimmick bosses can be fun, but an unclear puzzle easily makes for a bad gimmick boss. Alright, so you're going bold with your gimmick boss, right? Great. Watch out for the next problem though, the beginner's trap. Here lies the bosses whose gimmicks are impossible to react to. It's roughly the opposite of tough but fair. Beginner's trap bosses have some catch that a new player can't predict, can't really adapt to on the fly, and in the worst cases, also give heavy penalties for unavoidable failure. You can't talk about boss gimmicks without bringing up FromSoft. They've made a name for themselves with brutal bosses, and for better or worse, the team isn't afraid of changing up their boss fight formula. The range of styles can get pretty extensive. Sometimes it's a horde of souped up normal enemies. Throw them in a special arena or feature a unique attack. Add in a special stipulation the player needs to handle. Make the boss's weakness hyper-specific and see what happens. FromSoft bosses are not stuck doing the typical dance of dodge and damage. Maybe it's Dark Souls 2's chariot fight, finding cover in a narrow hallway before you get run over. Or Elden Ring's Renala, whose shield must be taken down by taking out the load-bearing Mook first. Bloodborne's Mikolash is a deadly game of pursuit through a castle maze, and is bad. FromSoft's boss design has the range, even if there are some misses mixed in there. Their biggest miss might be Dark Souls 1's Bed of Chaos. A giant mess of branches holds 2 magic seals you need to reach and destroy, before you can get into the center to reach the boss's actual weak spot. By itself, the boss isn't great, but it's not that unusual. It'll sweep the arena floor with its long arms, and it'll take some quick reflexes to spot and avoid. Each seal is located at the sides, and it's a little tough to get to the first one while dodging, but it's doable. After that though, the floor starts to break away, and falling through means an instant death. The boss becomes a platforming challenge. You know, the thing Dark Souls is good at. Now you have to navigate a maze of death pits, while still keeping an eye out for the sweep attacks. Getting hit not only damages you, but there's a good chance you'll get knocked into one of the pits. The boss is too big to see, so these swipes often come in fast from off screen. The floor pits are predetermined, but there's no clue for what's about to break away before it happens. If this is your first time here, I hope you've got your guessing hat on. Your clumsy heavy jump and your memory are the only things keeping you from having to start over. Every time you fail, it's a 1 to 2 minute trek back to the door, though thankfully the seals you already took care of will stay broken. Once you guess your way through, the middle opens up. Now you have more arms flailing, all the pits from before, new lava pillars, and you have to make a leap of faith and dive into the center. This leap onto a route with a weird hitbox is basically the climax of the fight. Make it and you're home free. But you'll probably miss it at least once. Start over. Bed of Chaos is a mess of an encounter, consistently rated one of, if not the worst fight in the series. Dark Souls' notorious difficulty only works when the difficulty comes from the challenge of executing on subtle signs, on learning when to attack, when to defend, and how to recognize when to change tactics. Bed of Chaos holds too much randomness, too many cases of guesswork for that covenant with the player to hold up. The clunky platforming mechanics don't help, and the labyrinth of death pits make things worse, but Bed of Chaos owes its reputation to its unpredictability. It's possible to combine several pitfalls at once. Combine a beginner's trap, a puzzle boss with limited solutions, punishment on death, and tough action mechanics, and you can create a real problem. The tail end of Megaman 2 has an awful mini-boss at the end of the 4th Wily Castle stage. The Boo Beam Trap isn't a giant robot or a robot master. Megaman is trapped in a small room with 5 mounted dome turrets, some blocked off behind destructible walls. The dome turrets will charge up and fire powerful shots straight at you. They come at you fast, so watch your back and maybe bring an E-Tank. To clear the map, you have to hit the 5 domes and 2 walls to get to the domes. But there's a catch. The only way to destroy both the walls and the turrets here is with the Crash Bomb. No other weapon will put a dent in these things. Even with Crash Bombs, there's another catch. Assuming you had the foresight to get here with the Crash Bomb fully loaded, you still only have at most 7 shots to use. You need to hit them all. It is possible to clear the room with it, but every shot has to count. Oh, and don't forget about all the dodging from before, or you might not even get a chance to fire off all 7. Anything less than perfection, or a spare E-tank, and you're dead. Your weapons don't refill on death, so you can almost softlock yourself if you die too late into the fight without any ammo. Then you'll just have to grind out weapon energy in the preceding stage before you can try again. This thing is the most inflexible and punishing fight of the game, and maybe the series. You have absolutely 0 other ways to attack the fight and almost no room for error, and this is still just a random mini-boss. The fight has no warning about how restrictive it will be to fight. You're thrown straight into the deep end and left to fend for yourself. Thankfully, it's a short fight if you know what you're in for, but on a blind casual playthrough, this thing's brutal. An unyielding challenge of a flavor that we barely ever get in a modern game. And maybe for good reason. Okay, let's do one more category. I'm calling it aiming too high. This is for the really ambitious terrible boss gimmicks. We're talking bosses that introduce all new mechanics that absolutely do not work. The fundamentally unfun. The swerve takes the game into an experimental gameplay style that just doesn't click. They shot for the stars and missed. Knight's Journey of Dreams for the Wii isn't a game with a lot of punchy, stabby, shooty going on. It's a lot more flying through rings in a 2D, 3D world. The only offensive moves you really have against enemies are looping around them, grabbing them, or running straight into them. You don't even take damage normally. If you get hit, it shaves some time off the clock. Since the game's moveset is so atypical, most of the bosses go for more gimmick-focused designs. They're closer to action puzzles. You're more likely to be navigating or manipulating the stage than you are to do any direct combat. Some of the bosses are okay, like the clown balloon you push into a bed of spikes. Some of them are a lot worse, like Bamamba and her entourage of cat balls. The fight takes place on a triangular board with some holes. The balls will spawn, and you have to use the levers on the sides of the board to tilt it around and get the balls into the holes while dodging the occasional projectile. Did you notice that the game doesn't focus on physics during normal gameplay? This fight's the exception. It feels terrible. Ball-based physics puzzles were not a strength of the mid-2000s Sonic team. The cat ball's momentum feels wrong. Way too floaty and way too slow. They're very lightweight, and they'll hop in the air for no reason as you're tilting the board. More often than you think, you'll overshoot your target. It's not so bad in the first fight, where there are guardrails on the board to help guide the balls to where you need to go, but those are gone in the second fight, where they also add little hills to make it even more annoying to control. The camera angle is far too low while you're tilting the board, so you can't quite see where the ball is in relation to the hole, and you can misjudge how you have to adjust the board. You can only tilt down and to the sides, so every time you overshoot or need to move away to dodge a projectile, you've got to fly over to another handle on another side of the board to try again. It's both too simple and too unwieldy to be fun. The Bamamba's Fight's gimmick doesn't feel like refined gameplay, more like a high concept that wasn't iterated on enough. In practice, it's a tedious fight, putting the spotlight on a physics model that makes you feel like you're failing at the most basic job in the world. Even a style boss that would be pretty normal almost anywhere else can become a bad gimmick in the wrong circumstances. Neon White is a mix of parkour action, a touch of shooting, and one of the friendliest introductions to speedrunning that a game has ever been. Every map is a unique chance to get better and push down your best time. The gameplay is about fluid movement, efficiency, skips, shortcuts, refinement, and repetition. And repetition. And repetition. The boss fights are 3 of the same clunky shooting gallery. Neon Green, your ultra anime antagonist rival with a mysterious connection to your past, is the target of the game's handful of boss stages. Each stage is a cinematic obstacle course, not all that unlike the normal game, with one important change. You have to take Neon Green's health bar down to 0 to win. In any other game, that would be the most normal boss design you could come up with. In this game, the focus was never on whittling down enemy health. Neon Green is a bullet sponge, and he's got a shield around him. Take out all the crystals powering the shield as fast as you can, and depending on where you are, he might fly away, or let you beat him up a little. The boss fights are a lot longer than most of the game's levels. It does make the fight way more cinematic, but it comes at a cost. You have no more health than normal, and dying late in the boss fight might take you back to the start. The fight is a highly scripted affair, so you're going to have to do that whole 3 minutes again and again until you get it all right. The repetition that works for shorter stages works against the longer boss fights. It's the inverse approach to a lot of my favorite levels in the game, where the small mistakes you make aren't that bad because the entire level is over in a matter of seconds. You're on a much shorter loop to fix a problem with your execution. The boss fight length tilts the dynamic the opposite way. Instead of feeling aspirational like in the rest of the levels, trying to improve your play in a boss stage will fill you with dread. Neon Green shows that no matter how basic the gimmick might look on paper, there are no guarantees with gimmick bosses. You know, there are more terrible bosses out there. I know you've got one in mind. Tell us about it in the comments, and maybe we'll feature it in a future episode. The weirder, the better. Terrible boss gimmicks are often a case of reaching way beyond what a game's capable of handling. Gimmicky bosses are fun, but no matter how crazy your ideas get, just make sure your game can stick the landing.